Welcome to the What is God podcast. I'm your hostess, Shifa Bloom, and today we're here with Rachel Gibler. And Rachel is a very special guest. I've known her since last October when we met on a retreat together. And she is the hostess of a top 12 spirituality podcast in the US called It's Fucking Spiritual. And she hosts retreats and she's a transformational coach and she's doing really, really cool things in the world. So welcome, first of all, Rachel.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, it's really cool to have you here. And I was particularly excited to have you on this podcast called What is God? And, the premise is what and where is God and what does it have to do with me? And that's what we talk about. And I talk to people from different perspectives and different walks of life about that question. And what I'm particularly excited to hear from you for is that you host this podcast. It's Fucking Spiritual. And I feel like you have this very unique perspective that holds reverence and irreverence in this beautiful tandem that is really cool. And so I'm just going to dive right in and let people hear from you. Yeah, take the floor.
Beautiful. Yeah. Thank you so much for that reflection. I deeply appreciate it. And that's really what It's Fucking Spiritual is about. It's honoring the messiness of the human experience, as well as recognizing and honoring the divinity that is within each of us. And holding that dichotomy really true and allowing it, seeing our divinity, but also allowing it to be fun. And I think so much of spirituality can be so serious. And so I love to bring a light and human approach to the way that I teach, while also understanding the deep reverence that, God is within every single one of us. Right. And it's really beautiful. So thank you for recognizing that.
Yeah, so let's talk about God a little bit.
Yeah.
This, even I talk about your podcast sometimes just in conversation because I think even in the name, there's a lot to unpack there, where you have these two words that would seem in opposition to one another, and yet you're bringing them in together. And so I actually would love to start there and just have you unpack a little bit of why your podcast is called that and what it means to you, and then we can go deeper.
I love it. Yes. Oh my gosh. I love this question so much because it is meant to be polarizing. The law of polarity and what I stand for is the polarity of existing and what it means to be human. And it's meant to be a little bit jarring. It's meant to be like, wait, what? Do those things go together? Are we allowed to do that? It breaks boundaries. It breaks the mold. It breaks it in the name, in those three words, It's Fucking Spiritual. You already know what I'm about.
Yeah.
And that was the point. It was meant to get you to stop and think. It was meant to get you to be like, is this okay? Can we do this? Right? So that, from like a sheer marketing standpoint, right, to draw people in, I can't tell you how many times my podcast has blown up because of the name, because we I show up so high in the SEO because of the name, and people are like, it's scroll stopping and people want to click on it to go deeper, which is really beautiful, because if people aren't clicking, like what's the point of, you're not able to spread the work as much as you'd like to. So there was an element of like that to it, but deeper than that, it represents the polarity in the way that I teach, in the way that I serve, and the polarity that I believe we get to hold as a collective as we're going through this process. So I realized, we can be there's love and light, and there's all these beautiful things that we get to tap into that exist. And also light can't exist without the dark, right? Doing the shadow work, being the messy parts of ourselves. And so much of my work has been meeting myself in both aspects and loving myself all the way through, loving my light, loving my darkness, loving everything in between, and also loving that in every single other person.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's fucking spiritual represents the dichotomy that exists between all of us, within all of us, and as a collective, the polarity that exists in everything. And so that's really the reason why I named it that, as well as I like to break the mold a little bit.
I
So
love it. I love it so much.
thank
Um,
you.
so as you're speaking, I take notes sometimes just to
Yeah.
really absorb what you're saying. And so I wrote, polarity. And then on one side, I wrote light and beauty. And on the other side, I wrote dark, messy, chaos. And then there was a circle in the middle with an arrow pointing to self. That's what I just got out of what you said. And
Beautiful. Wow. Yeah. Perfect description.
And so I wanted to deepen the question now with that in mind of this light, dark, beauty, messy, with the self in the middle, and say, okay, well, then what does that have to do with God and how we relate to this force that we call God?
I love that. So if I'm sitting with that question, we're in this 3D reality, in this 3D planet, right? And so within the 3D reality, the polarity exists. It's a law. It's a law of the universe that the light and the dark exists. We can't have one without the other. And what I believe God is purely source consciousness, existing in everything. Like we are God, the universe becoming conscious of itself. And doing this work, we as the ego, so me as Rachel, can witness, can see, and define the light and the dark, the good and the bad, of whatever polarity that you want to offer. But if I get still enough and I observe from a witness consciousness, and I dial it all the way back to the pure source that is within me, it sees the light and the dark without judgment, but all as love. And brings all of this together. So the integration piece that we do in our human bodies, right? Of like, I want to integrate all these parts of myself. What God is to me is the consciousness that holds for all of it, that is pure love, that is the true source. And in this 3D reality, we have the polarity, but getting back to the true source of who you are and the God within yourself sees and holds for all of it, because it all is actually perfect.
Yeah, thank you. I want to point out something I really appreciate about the way that you're speaking, because this is something that I think about a lot in my work, and it might be something that some listeners are picking up on, and maybe some aren't. And so I want to point out how when you're speaking slowly and you're breathing well. And I want to point that out for people because it's something that I really focus on in my work and in my client work as well. And so when you're doing it, I'm noticing it and what's happening for me in my body. And I'm curious if any listeners might have had this experience in listening to you, is that as you were speaking, because first of all, we're talking about a subject of God and spirituality. So there's that frequency there already, but there's also this breath that's coming in, which is connecting us to our life force and to God. And I'm feeling this almost honey-like quality of the field around us. And I'm feeling that stillness start to, spread around us and that tapped inness. And so I just wanted to take a moment to point that out for us and for everyone listening of how even something as simple as the way you are speaking and breathing can already start to tap us in.
beautiful share and being a witness to that and seeing that. Thank you for that reflection. And to expand upon that,
Mm-hmm.
we live in a society and in our life that is go, go, go all the time. Do, like execute faster, more, bigger, and we can get very caught up in that rat race, if you will, but like the constant like go, go, go all the time. And that's the ego self, the Rachel self. And I do that like in my life as I'm expanding, like I noticed that and witnessed that was within myself. But if I bring it back to my answer to the last question of us being purely source energy, when we really get down to the truth, and that part of us that needs to go and do all the things can soften, and we can move that aside for a moment. What we really are is clear channels for divinity. Mm-hmm. And divinity is nature's frequency. Nature moves slowly, with intention, with ease. It's a healing frequency. So when we can get out of the ego that is Rachel, that is Shifra, that is anybody listening to this, the shoulds of life, I have to, right? And you slow it down, you're actually creating the ability to tap into the pure source consciousness that is actually you. And so that's what you're hearing. It's not an ego, I am pure source and I am it's a like it's a frequency that exists within all of us. And the more that you learn how to slow and create spaciousness, okay, there's a space, and that space expands, and what that space fills with is the pure source consciousness that you're given that comes through you. And that energy moves slowly.
Beautifully said. There's this concept of entrainment.
Yes.
And it's something that I really love, is how if you go into antique store of old clocks, and there's 100 different clocks all ticking at different rates, and then there's a grandfather clock that's ticking at the speed that it's ticking at. Eventually, all the clocks in the room will start to go at the same rate as the biggest clock in the room. And so what I find is that it's similar with the breath. If our breath is like us, our, ticking, and you go into a room, the person who's the biggest clock in the room, that's where eventually the others will gravitate towards. And so that's why it can be so important to notice what our input is. What are we listening to? Are we listening to music at a certain frequency that's really anxiety provoking? Or are we listening to, a podcast where the frequency of the people speaking is actually lifting us up, whatever is happening throughout our day? And, I think what's really interesting, and I don't know that I've said it quite like this before, but after listening to a certain podcast, it would be interesting for one to notice, am I breathing better or worse? Am I breathing faster or deeper after listening to that show? And that would be a marker of, is this healing for me or not?
Yeah. Oh, I love that. And I love that you brought up the process of entrainment. It's not talked about as much in this space. Or I guess the deeper you go into this space, it can be, depending on where you are. But that process of we sync up with the vibration that is around us.
Yeah.
And noticing, and I love that you brought up the breath too. The breath is the bridge between the conscious and the unconscious, or the physical and the spiritual realm. And so if you're listening to this right now and you notice, like, hopefully as you're listening, you're beginning to breathe deeper, but notice throughout your day, am I holding my breath? So many people hold their breath And when you just begin to notice how it is that you're breathing, and you begin to breathe deeper, you begin to actually unlock certain ways of being.
Yeah.
And I love that you said about noticing the input, because there's constantly input and vibration and frequency around us. And it's entrainment is a deeper way to explain all of the things that we talk about. Even you're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time around. You become the energy, right? Someone's good vibes or not good vibes that you're around. I always like to break this down for people because it sounds like very scientific, but it's actually everything that you've ever been taught, and it's saying it in a deeper way.
Right.
You literally begin to vibrate at the vibration and frequency of what you are surrounded by. And it's beautiful, because if we can become aware of that in the ways that vibration can possibly affect us in a quote unquote negative way, then we also get to understand how it can affect us in a healing way. And we can get into sound healing and so many different things by the process of entrainment. But I love that you brought that up, because it's really beautiful.
Thank you. One more thing I wanted to mention about the breath, and then I have another question I'm excited to ask you, but I just thought I would bring in that. So in the Kabbalah, which is the Jewish mysticism, there's different levels of the soul, and the level of the soul that would be like our higher self, let's say, is called neshama, and the root of neshama comes from breath. And so I just wanted to bring that in as well, because one of the things that I love doing in this podcast is to really highlight the places of connection within different spiritual traditions. And so I wanted to bring that in as well.
That's beautiful and very important. And that's something I always say, is that so many things are explanation for the same thing, said in a different way. And it's really beautiful and deepens your belief and understanding when you can see the connection between all of them. So I love that you're doing that.
Yeah. So especially on something that has historically been divisive. The next question I wanted to get your perspective on the question of what is spirituality, because historically there's religion, and then there's spirituality, and sometimes they're clumped together, and sometimes it's like, no, those are two different things. And that's part of where, historically this topic of God has been divisive. And that's why I love bringing in the connection points. But being that, you are who you are, and you speak on this subject, and that this is what your, life's work is about. I want your perspective on that. Yeah. What is spirituality anyway? What do we mean when we say that?
I love this. And this is something that I sit with. And I don't know if I have the perfect answer to, because I came through the door of spirituality first, not from religion to spirituality. And I agree with you, it can be incredibly divisive. For me, spirituality is the thread that ties all religions together. And while on the top layer, there can be different names for gods, there can be different traditions within a specific religion, the thread is the spiritual aspect of that which we all are, which is the source consciousness. And I love now hearing different viewpoints of different religions, and like you just said, different explanations, and tying those things in, because I believe it deepens the belief. And when we can see them as all complementary and not contrasting, we get the true purpose of what each means, right? But what humans have done throughout history through the ego have created this I'm right, you're wrong polarity, or sense of control of like, this is the way, this is what we have to do. This is in specific organized religions, of course, not all of them, but that's what's happened throughout history. And so there has become a somewhat weaponized spiritual weaponization of spirituality for a human's egoic desire, if you will. Mm-hmm. So I think that that's at least the way that I perceive of it, is that spirituality is the thread, it's the undertone, it's the thing that holds all of the different religions. Mm-hmm. And I think it's really beautiful. And when we can come back all to one and recognize that all religions have something to teach us, all religions are really different explanations of the same thing in many different ways. And while on the surface, they might have different beliefs, it really does, if you get to the pure source and dial it down into what I believe is God, which is the pure source consciousness, which is love, that is actually the true purpose of each religion.
So if spirituality is this thread of connection and it's all spiritual,
yeah,
then what that makes me think is that whatever is happening throughout my day, whatever is coming up in my life, if it's all spiritual, then it's all spirituality, meaning there's a thread of connection here for me, meaning this is what it makes me think, meaning if something comes up in my life, let's say it's something that I perceive as negative, I can go, okay, there's a thread of connection here. Yeah. This is shining a light on something for me. This is purposeful. This is connected. This is part of, oftentimes. So a friend of mine recently, put out a prayer for some things to come into her life. And then all of a sudden it seemed like everything was imploding. And I was telling her, well, the person you were wasn't going to be able to hold the things you called in. Right. Mm-hmm. And so that perspective of one way of saying, what does it mean if it's all spiritual, is there's a thread of connection in everything.
Yeah, absolutely. And your decision to perceive of it in that way is what allows you to create from a place as a co-creator in your life consciously.
Right. So then that brings me to the third part of the question of what does it have to do with me? And that word co-creator, let's end with that topic of, what does God have to do with me? What does it mean to be a co-creator? How do I even do that?
Yeah. We are not victims to our reality or our circumstances. We are here for a reason. We really truly believe that we are God in human form and source consciousness becoming conscious of itself. We are co-creating with our reality at every single moment. And the amount of power that you have to create what it is that you desire, or just what the power that you hold to create at any moment, whether you're conscious of it or not, whether you're creating things that you love and desire or not, you are creating your reality at every single moment. Your thoughts carry a frequency. Your words hold a specific vibrational resonance that draws and magnetizes certain things to you. And so when you can begin to create the spaciousness within yourself and the awareness within yourself to see that you are a 100% creator inside of your life, and the universe simply responding back to you that which it is that you're calling in and perceiving of, you realize how much power you truly have, and it gives you back your life. Mm. And that's why it's important. That's what it means for you, is that like you are in this reality to create and to explore and to experience and to play. You would not have come here if you were not meant for that aspect. And if you weren't so incredibly powerful, there was like a 1 in 400 trillion chance that you were going to be born exactly as you in this very moment, in this very body. How do you believe that that's not a miracle? Mm. So when we truly sit with that truth and you really let it land and sink in how much power you truly have, you'd never miss a moment.
Mm. Oh, that's so powerful.
Mm.
I feel inspired right now. I feel motivated. I feel really grateful that we got to have this time together on here.
Me too.
So I feel like this is a really perfect place to end because that was such a powerful message
Mm.
to send people off into the rest of their day with. And me, I know that this conversation has definitely set the tone for the rest of my day. So thank you.
Thank you. Me as well.
And so I know we spoke about your podcast, but I would also love people to know how they can connect with you further.
Yeah, absolutely. Come hang out with me on Instagram. That's where I mainly hang out, at Rachel Gibler, which I'm sure you'll put in the show notes. And of course, on my podcast, It's Fucking Spiritual, on Spotify, on Apple. At the time of this release, we'll probably just be launching my second season or around there. So, yeah, come hang out and listen to beautiful conversations, and definitely message me or DM me if you found me from this podcast. I'd love to connect with you, and just thank you for listening.
Perfect. Okay, everyone. Thank you guys so much for listening. Thank you to Rachel for coming on. I'm Shifra Bloom. This is the What is God podcast. And if you didn't know, it is free to subscribe, and we hope you will come and hang out with us again. See you next time.